Hello and welcome to the omnigamersclub podcast, the podcast for games on all platforms, including the PS Vita. I have one right here.
Ooh.
I am Mark Uessa.
I am Daniel Winter, and I've been meaning to dig out my PS Vita as well. There's a couple of older games, classic console.
Oh, is it ever? Yeah, I'm actually going to be talking about classic retro games a little bit later, so a little spoiler. But I should say that this is our playlist for the week of January the 19th. And this is where we just talk about stuff on the side, news to us, games that we've been playing in general, as we wait for our featured game, which will be coming in about a week or so. So we're just going to chat. Daniel, you want to start us off with some news or news to you?
Yeah, well, speaking of portable gaming consoles being 30% bigger, there's been news this week with the Nintendo Switch 2 being finally confirmed, but very much rumored for a few years now. And yeah, I don't know if there's a whole lot to talk about other than we know it's happening. We know it's going to be called the Switch 2, which is probably the least Nintendo name possible. It was a little strange how much the announcement video felt more like an Apple product announcement with all the sort of the tech fetishization rather than like that classic Nintendo character and like no actual people interacting with this thing to be seen. But yeah, very exciting to see how they're going to grow that console, and very much it seems in the same direction as the current Switch.
Yeah, I feel pretty much the same as I felt the day before the announcement was made. I, really feel no difference. I knew that this was happening, and all the rumors were true. This is pretty much like par for the course, even, more conservative than ever before.
Mm.
And I think that Nintendo has probably learned from the Wii U debacle. That follow-up system with a confusing name was not really popular, and it did not build on the momentum of the wildly popular predecessor console, the Wii,
Well, that's the
as
thing.
they had
Nintendo have
hoped.
never been one to follow the easy, the easy sequel, right? They could have easily made the Wii 2, and they didn't. And I'm a sympathizer for the Wii U. I got like one second hand pretty late in that generation, and thought it was a pretty good little console. I mean, very well. It wasn't. It was trying to fulfill a little too many needs, in not being not enough of a dedicated portable device.
Yeah, I don't know. Like Nintendo goes up and down. Like lately, they've been going wilder and swinging for the fences. But yeah, in their early portable era, I mean, the Game Boy Color. I
Mm.
think there was even something called a Game Boy Pocket that was not released in North America anyway. It was released in Japan only potentially. There's the GBA SP, of which there were several versions. I'm holding one right now up to the camera. There's the Game Boy Micro. So you could call all of those iterative releases. Essentially, they didn't do much other than adding color, adding new bits. They're
In
essentially
3D.
going for the same model. 3DS did go a little bit wilder, but you could argue that 3DS was just building on DS
Mm.
and following the 3D trend. So I think they have been iterative in the past. This is just probably them going back to some conservative angles and probably responding to shareholders.
And the Switch
Uh,
is a very good console, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I guess.
they didn't fix it. No, they just made it slightly bigger. So yeah, most likely my family will get it, but I'm personally not excited about it. There's other
Yeah,
good systems out there.
yeah. I mean, I haven't been particularly invested in the Switch, partly because Nintendo has had such a weird relationship with its digital libraries. For one thing, like I think it
Right?
was in the 3DS generation where any purchases you made were connected to that physical device, and if you lost your 3DS and had to buy a new one, then you got to buy those games again. And inconsistent backwards compatibility and what purchases carry across. So I'm hopefully looking forward to like more carry through with the digital purchases and the sort of digital infrastructure.
Yeah, I was really sad to see that when I booted up my 3DS a couple of days ago to see. I guess I had heard the news that they were shutting down the DSi store, the 3D whatever store, um, and that I couldn't access any of the digital titles that I had, even some of the freebies that were there. They still listed them, but I could not download them anymore. So, yeah, it is a little sad that Nintendo, of all people, a company that people generally consider quite good to their fans, good quote unquote, is highly protective of their IP and will not let you play games that you've bought before, even in digital form, and seems to be continuing along the track of charging you over and over again to play those old titles, or in the form of the Nintendo Online, they want to charge you every month for the privilege of playing those old titles. So, yeah, in a lot of ways, I'm not a big, happy fan of Nintendo, but obviously they're a juggernaut that you can't ignore.
Yeah, so much of the of the Switch generation was defined by re-releasing old games that weren't previously available. I mean, just this week you have Donkey Kong Returns, I think it is the Wii game, finally available on the Nintendo Switch for $80.
Right, and the one game they announced with the Switch 2 demo seems to be Mario Kart 9. And of course, 8 has been around for about 10 years in various iterations across 3 different platforms. So that's a long time to rehash the same old stuff. But anyways, this is sounding like a Nintendo bashing segment. Hopefully there's some exciting stuff to come.
Yeah. Well, from what I've heard, Xbox potentially has a new handheld device on the way as well. Not to mention the compatibility with other devices. They've got their whole new marketing campaign of this is an Xbox, this is an Xbox, no, this is an Xbox. Everything's an Xbox. This notebook is an Xbox.
Yep, partnering with notably like a lot of TV manufacturers like Samsung and LG, saying, "Hey, this stuff is built in." I think it's a smart move. Like they want to sell software, and the way to sell a lot of software is by making it widely available
and having that library available on multiple devices without having to buy those games all over again.
That is actually consumer friendly because they don't lock you in to a hardware platform, and from a business perspective, most hardware manufacturers lose money every console that they sell. So why hurt yourself so that you can help yourself?
Yeah, we are fast moving into the consoleless world, and if everything's a console, nothing's a console.
Interesting. That might touch on a topic I want to discuss further later.
What is news to you, Mark?
Well, I don't know. This is opening up a little bit of a hornet's nest potentially. I purposely withheld this topic from you because I wanted to get a sense of what you think about it. And I've been, you might notice, playing a lot of retro games. A couple of the games I'm going to be talking about later are, in fact, games that have been around for 30 plus years that I've been getting back into. So I've been playing these old games on the various consoles, and I've been playing my physical copies of them. Like this collection here is the Phantasy Star collection. Ooh. So this is the original Phantasy Star single-player RPG series, by the way, not the online multiplayer-focused latter-day series. And it's making me really, I don't know, energized about properties I played in the past, about like kind of examining my personal library of games I owned and played in the past, and trying to fill in gaps. Like I played this half of a game's history, but I didn't play these other titles in the history. So I've been really energized about retro games, and a lot of that has come from, ironically, my oldest kid. Has been really getting into retro because I guess they see these devices around the house that I have collecting dust, and they asked to buy an old copy of a Pokemon cartridge because, once again, Nintendo doesn't make a lot of their they certainly don't make a lot of their older Pokemon titles available, except in remake form, where they can charge a lot more money for them. So I think they asked to get this copy of Pokemon Emerald, which is a
GBA?
GBA title, that's right, Game Boy Advance. So I hadn't played it. Pokemon actually came out a little bit late in my life, so I was a little too old for it to get into it. I was kind of, just, heading into university or whatever. I was just had different things in my mind. Totally missed me. So it's not nostalgic to me, but I can understand to a lot of people it is. And some of those great early titles were locked on some of those older cartridge-based systems. And if you look on the used market for those things, they're quite wild. Like these
Yeah, I
cartridges are
imagine.
going for ridiculous amounts. My family is planning, we're in the midst of planning for a trip we're going to take later this year to Japan. So we're going to go there in the summer. And I know for a fact that lots more retro games are available there. So what I told my oldest kid was, just save your money for now, and we'll go to Japan and we'll buy some retro titles there. And they're like, "But Dad, I don't read Japanese." And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, you could learn," which is a lot to ask, a 13-year-old.
What's the
So
main reason that most teens get into Japanese, right? Is to watch their favorite anime
yeah,
or JRPGs.
yeah, precisely. And a lot of like non people that are not don't have Japanese heritage
Mm.
would probably be into picking up some of those old titles just to say I have Pokemon Yellow
Yeah.
or whatever. But anyways, even so what is a kid to do? Like my kid wants to play those retro titles but can't speak the language. So my thought was, well, why don't you pirate them? But with a stipulation. You get yourself a copy of Pokemon Blue or whatever and buy a copy from Japan in Japanese, and you can download the ROM to play it in English.
Mm.
Because from my perspective, there's nothing wrong going on there. There's nothing you are gaining from playing the ROM other than something that you could gain yourself by spending 10 years learning Japanese.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of these third-party portable devices, kind of like no-name Game Boys, and there's a
Right.
whole secondary market for those now that have quite a wide following. And I've been meaning to look into some of those devices. I mean, mind you, I wouldn't know where to start with ROMs these days. I haven't, I wouldn't know where to look to do any piracy. I don't do anything like that. But
Well,
I'm not sure how.
yeah, I wouldn't call it piracy myself. But
No, yeah,
that's
yeah,
the topic I wanted to jump into
it's a grey area for sure.
is how can I play those retro games that I already own?
Mm.
And I do own a ton. I actually took a lot of time this past couple of weeks, I guess over the holidays, just cataloging all the games that I do own
Mm.
from from game collections. For instance, the Sega Genesis Mega Drive collection, which I own apparently twice now. I own it on Switch and for PC. It's got 50 or so games in it. I own both the NES Classic and the SNES Classic hardware devices. Are you familiar with those?
Oh, the re-release ones from
Yeah.
last few years.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
mini
yeah.
like emulation machines. So I own both of those and they each have 20, 25 games on them
Mm.
each, plus all the cartridges and the digital games that I own. So I own something like, just checking out my spreadsheet here, I own 285 games, either physically or digitally, across Sega Master System, Genesis, NES, N64, PlayStation 1, 2, Vita, PSP, DS, 3DS. I have all those old systems. So I made a deal with my kid. I'm going to get a retro replica device, portable, and play all those games that I own on it because I would hold my kid to that standard as well.
Mm.
Is you want to play a retro game? Well, you have to own a copy.
Of course, these companies would argue you never actually own these games. You're like buying the digital rights to them.
Don't get me started. Back in those days when you owned a hardware
Mm.
copy, you owned it. And I think upheld by US law anyways. I don't know about Canadian
Interesting.
law.
Yeah,
You are allowed to do with that copy what you want.
yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of those cartridges just don't work anymore. Even if you have the console
Yes,
still functioning, there's like batteries inside the
that's
cartridge,
right.
right?
That's
Mm.
exactly right. Like a lot of NES games, the save function, if the save even existed, don't work anymore because the batteries have died on them. So that's another reason why I want to play these old ROMs, because when I play that on a new device, it'll save it in digital form. I can back that up into the cloud.
Mm.
So to me, I feel like it's not piracy. Anyways, it's a large topic with a lot of nuance to it. So I ordered myself a retro device, and for long story short, my kid is playing it right now, so I
Excellent.
can't show it to you.
Well, I'm
But
very curious to hear your experience with any device, and I've been looking into one myself. I'm not really sure what the best option out there is.
I would happily share some more with you offline of this
Of
conversation.
course.
And if anyone's interested, maybe we can bring up the topic again in the future.
Mhm.
All right.
Certainly, yeah. I'm all about games preservation. Very
Very
important
cool.
topic.
All right. That's my spiel. Hopefully the short
The
version of
soapbox.
that. Yeah. All right. Shall we talk about a bit more news, or what do you think? Games
Yeah,
we've been playing?
let's just jump into what we've been playing lately. Yeah, there's lots
Nice.
to get through because it's been
All
a little
right.
while since we've had a regular playlist.
Yeah, we did our kind of games of 2024, the
Hmm.
last episode,
Yep.
and then this is our first playlist in a while. So why don't you get us started?
Yeah, well, let's start with the video games as usual. So, I mean, I over the holiday break caught up on a lot of older games, games that I'd started and hadn't finished, and a few sort of game of year discussions had highlighted a few things I wanted to check out. So yeah, finished a lot of games in the last few weeks, including Indiana Jones, which we talked about recently on the Game of the Year episode. Finally finished Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which are all 100 or so hours of it. A game that
Oh
was so
wow.
incredibly bloated in so many ways. A more responsive and dynamic game than the first one, but just so many systems upon systems and time sinks that I could complain about that game all day, and yet it was still compelling enough to actually finish all 100 hours of it. So, looking forward to the third one of that after I've taken a break. But one other game I played was Flock. So this is on Game Pass. I can't remember the name of the publisher, but it's basically it looks a bit like Journey, sort of somewhat cell shaded, cartoony world. You're flying around on the back of this big cartoon bird, but you're zooming around and flowing through the world in a very freeform way, like Journey or Flower, any of the that game company games. Which is always thrilling, that sense of momentum and just soaring through the air. There's all these loops and arches you can fly through to speed up and just gain momentum flying around this world. Because it's a more open world, and you can just large part of the joy of it is just flying around and checking out the landscapes. It's very sort of alien world with lots of weird shaped trees and mushrooms and things, and only the ruins of any human civilization. So the other half of this game is almost Pokemon esque. There's, I think, something like there's like several dozen animals, skyfish, I think they're called. Basically, they look like they're swimming through the air like fish, essentially. But a lot of them are inspired by birds, especially in their sounds. That's one of the biggest draws. Is just the soundscapes of these birds. So, like if you're looking for one in particular, you can often hear by flying through the forest and just listening for that particular bird if you're trying to find it. And you can catch them eventually, and then have them following you around in this big flock, as the name of the game. There is a story sort of guiding you through, and you're gradually unlocking new areas. And there's a few of the creatures that are a little more involved in trying to find and then catch them, and then even naming them. You go through the process of picking a name in some fun ways. I think it stops short of ever really becoming truly like where it ends is basically the most interesting part of all these of some of the more involved situations that you have to go through. It was a little bit like Cocoon. Like by the end of the game, you're tying all these mechanics together in some really fascinating ways, and then the game ends. And so it stops a little bit short of becoming truly compelling, I think, in that sense. You want a little bit more of it, a little more involved. But it is very fun. Just my daughter was playing with me. It was at the game that we've been playing for the last couple of weeks. Yeah, and just a fascinating study in sort of ecosystems. In just soaring around the world, looking at the different birds and the calls, and like the diverse range of these creatures. It was very cute. The game to just hang out in, and I believe it does have a co-op mode I saw being promoted when it had first come out. I don't see it. There's not a lot to do with if you're playing with other people other than just everyone soaring around and catching birds and just hanging out in that world. I don't think it's quite dynamic enough. I'd like to see it. I would have liked to see something a little deeper, but it is for a few hours just to hang out in and see all the different creatures there are. It's a fun little game.
Very nice. That does sound cool. Although, if they are just coming to a cool part in the game, maybe they're opening things up for a sequel. perhaps.
Potentially, yeah.
That's a smart thing someone can do. So I started the episode talking about retro games and games I've been enjoying, and I started playing this one, which is probably difficult to see on screen,
It is.
but I'll just say it's the Phantasy Star
Oh,
Collection
nice.
on GBA, which contains the games Phantasy Star 1, 2, and 3. The first one for the Sega Master System, and I think 2 and 3 for the Genesis or Mega Drive, depending on which region you were in. And if you look at it here on the screen, it'll say the year that this game came out was 1988.
Ooh, year I was born.
The year you were born, I was, how old was I? I was like 9 years old. So this is an ancient game, and I guess it was old when it got re-released on this GBA cartridge. And I thought, you know what? I really like that old game, or I remember thinking I really liked it. I would really like to go back and see it with new eyes, or more mature eyes. And I loaded it up, and it's surprisingly compelling. So this game follows along the old tradition of first-person dungeons. So I don't know if you are aware, but in early JRPGs, there was kind of like two branches of dungeon design, and one of them is top down, like you got your Final Fantasies and you got your Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest type, which is I think pretty much universally the overtaken everything else. But you also have a string of first-person dungeon crawlers, which have kind of had a comeback. So I think it was the Wizardry PC game series, which there were copies of Wizardry on NES, by the way, and other older consoles at the time. But games like Wizardry, which is a Western game, blew up in Japan. And games like Phantasy Star followed along that with first-person dungeons. So I think there is a couple of newer game series, like slightly newer, like Etrian Odyssey.
Which
I think
I've
that's
been
the
playing
title
recently.
you've been playing, right? First person dungeons. And the cool thing is it's turn-based.
Yeah.
So just like Dragon Quest or whatever, you walk one step, you move one square.
It's on a firm grid of tiles.
Exactly. For some reason, dungeons follow a very gridded paper style format, even in first person. And the newer PC games, the names are escaping me right now, but there's a couple of new turn-based first person dungeon crawlers on PC now.
Grimrock, I think, was a recent series.
Legend of Grimrock.
Yeah.
1 and 2. Which are like traditional fantasy, and I think there's even like a steampunky one whose name is escaping me right now. But that is the kind of mold that Phantasy Star follows, and the art design is a lot more like late 80s anime, kind of like think like Bubblegum Crisis, than later games would be, and a lot. I wouldn't exactly say mature, but it's not as quite kiddie friendly as Dragon Quest, which has the Akira Toriyama art, like Dragon Ball. So I really found the art of it compelling, and something about the color palette of the Sega Master System. I think it's just got like cooler tones, more vibrant colors. I don't even know if it has as many colors as the NES, but I just really appreciated the color palette. The music's great. And the artwork for the monsters is great in a totally different way than the artwork for the Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest games are, of course, great, legendary. But I just really think this series and the first one has a lot of personality, but it's frustrating as heck. It's got a lot of those old kind of archaic RPG mechanics and crutches, like grinding, like hidden rooms, like trapdoors, like just kind of exploration for the sake of it, lack of clues, really, really obtuse clues when they do exist.
Well, those clues were in the manual too.
Oh yeah, that's true. I of course don't have the manual from that, but just downright trickery. Like I older games like the Final Fantasy series is famous for this, has NPCs that just lie to you, right? They give you purposeful red herrings. So these old style game designs were really quite punishing because they wanted these games to last, right? They didn't have 1,000-person art teams cooking up new scenarios and new environments. They had to make, 3 environments, of which Phantasy Star has 3 different planets, but they're just palette swaps of each other. They had to make these worlds last for a long, long time.
You've got one game to last you the whole summer holidays.
Right. And this game, really, I never got through it as a kid. So because it was like something like 10 or 12 years since I loaded up the save file, because I had the original save file from when I originally played it on GBA.
Huh.
This cartridge held up. I had to look up a game FAQ, a game FAQ, to even figure out where I was in the story, what I had done. And because it caught me up fairly well, I just kind of like continued and leaned more on the game FAQ. Not 100%, but I just kind of like said, it's come on, man, it's been 30 years. Just let me finish this game. So I think I'm going to finish it with the aid of the FAQ.
So
and I'm okay with that.
Is the GBA version, is it in any way remastered compared to the original, or is it has bundled it together in its original format?
Not at all. I think they might have like tweaked some things like the aspect ratio.
Right. Okay.
Because the of course the Master System was made for 3:4 based TVs, CRT TVs, and the GBA is slightly wider in screen. It's mostly the same. It's more like a 2:3.
Interesting.
Aspect ratio on the GBA. But another great thing about this old hardware, I forgot that the DS played GBA games. What a great system. Anyways, so that was a walk down memory lane, but I think it's well worth it. And I'm going to continue on with the series because I have at least 3 more copies in the mainline single player series.
I think one of the online games recently got a big re-release too. Phantasy Star Online 2, I think.
Yeah, even Phantasy Star Online 2 has been running for about 10 years as well. So that's another long legacy. I really wish they would go back to single player RPGs, but I think that ship has sailed.
Awesome. Yeah, as I hinted, I've been playing some Etrian Odyssey, so looking forward to playing into that. And is Wizardry got a remaster this last year that I've been meaning to check out as well. So looking forward to exploring that genre.
Yeah, because we don't have enough 80-hour, 100-hour RPGs from the modern age to catch up on.
Of course, yes. Well, yeah, Metaphor Phantasy I just picked up again yesterday, so got to get through that first.
Yeah, RPG fans, we're gluttons for punishment. All right, another game from you.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly get through one more big highlight I got through this last week, which was a game I saw at the Vancouver Game Garden last year. Meaning to check out since. That is 1000 Times Resist. So this is made locally here by Sunset Visitor, I think is the developer. Apparently like an artist collective that started making video games during the COVID lockdown, basically, as a way of creating together throughout that. Because I mean, the game is very much about the pandemics amongst many other things. It's a huge tapestry of so many different themes that it's covering. You pull on one thread and a dozen others come out. So this is basically, it's not quite a visual novel. It's more like a walking simulator. You're largely walking around these spaces talking to other characters. There's not much actual gameplay necessarily. Told through this sort of very episodic fashion. There's sort of 10 episodes that play out about an hour each. It does feel a little bit paced like a TV show. But it's covering, I mean, it's at once a sci-fi story about a pandemic and like the one person who was immune to it. It's about a sort of the cult of there's all these clones of that person basically living in this complex together in the society that they form, and it's sort of this political thriller almost of how they're living and the sort of rebellion and changes to the setup there. It's about an immigration sort of coming of age story in some of the flashbacks, because you're exploring the story over hundreds of years, essentially, like flashbacks to the original pandemic event and inciting events. of this sort of immigrant girl moving to Canada. I think it's probably Vancouver. And so the tension there. I mean, it's become something of a trope with so many stories these days, where the real villain was generational trauma all along. It's one of those, but does so very well. It's very much full of flawed characters. I mean, you have so many young adult stories of a teen being the chosen one and leading the revolution, and this is a teen who is like the one person immune who can potentially save humanity, and she's kind of an asshole, like in all the ordinary ways that teens are jerks and like just bad friends and selfish and not like rude to their parents, and explores that in some really fascinating ways, and how that the implications of that carry it through the generations. So, not a lot I can say without spoiling too much. I mean, it starts very much in media res with you murdering the leader of this cult, but basically throws you in the deep end with like it'll just throw you. Here's 3 dialogue options you can choose from that are all sort of catechisms of this cult, with like 6-1 or hair to hair, and you have no idea what any of these mean, but it just you're forced to internalize and sort of makes you complicit in living through this sort of cult lifestyle. So yeah, I found the story to be really fascinating as it's sort of drawn out. It doesn't entirely stick some of the landing, because it's balancing so many plates at once. But it's an important story too about sort of resistance and radicalization, which is especially important right now, considering the circumstances. We're literally recording this on the eve of the next Trump inauguration. So I think very much mindful of the importance of resisting and not being complicit in all the horrible things that are about to happen, no doubt.
Yeah, that sounds like a very interesting premise. 1,000 Times Resist has, I mean, even though I was reminded probably just very loosely of things like, The Last of Us, the lone survivor of the sci-fi pandemic or whatnot, and then just like the generational survival. Reminds me of that episode. That's episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation with the colony of clones, of like six clones survived planetary crash, and they made a society of
that's right,
of clones. So that's really cool. I always love a sci-fi story that undergirds a game, and if you want to play a game that makes you feel guilty about cult choices, then just play Cult of the Lamb, which is a game we've covered in full on one of our older episodes. So that sounds really interesting.
Yeah. I wouldn't say too much more without spoiling it, but definitely, if any of those themes interest you, check out 1,000 Times Resist.
Very nice. I'm going to talk about another retro game, but really quickly. People are probably really bored of my retro game kind of obsession of the moment. But this one is a real gem and deserves to be revisited. That's why I've been spending a little bit of time with it as well. This game is called Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. And now there are 2 Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, one of them for the Game Boy Advance, one of them for the DS, which is called FFT A2, I believe. It's literally called A2, not
Gotta
Advance.
get those double barrel, triple barrel Final Fantasy names in there somewhere.
Right. Now, Final Fantasy Tactics is a game I've owned on 2 systems. I owned it on the PS1, and then actually 3 systems. It was remade for the PSP, which was called The War of the Lions. And then I also bought it for Android.
I think there's a mobile version.
Yeah, it's available on mobile as well, which actually adds touch, which it helps a great deal, and some other smooth some things out. But this game was, a retro game to begin with, and it was a game that was always too complex for me. I never got it. I never grokked the way that the class system works. It's quite Byzantine. All the different combinations and sort of min-maxing and specialization that you have to perform to sort of like, I don't know, like raise your crew accurately. So I never succeeded at Final Fantasy Tactics, but I loved it. But Tactics Advance was a decidedly different spin on things, and it's still like isometric turn-based tactical combat, but you still have job classes, but the way that you raise your crew, your party's skills is through equipment, which is entirely different. And it took me a while to remember that that's how it worked, because once again, I had a save file left over from 10 years ago. So basically, unlike the old game, you equip an item to a unit of a certain class, and once you use that ability that equipment gives you, you learn it permanently, which is brilliant because you can always dual class in Final Fantasy Tactics games. So you have a primary class, and then you can load up a secondary abilities based on another class. So you could be a knight that uses black magic, or you could be a monk that uses white magic, or something like that. Or the options are mind-boggling. So it's all about that mixing and matching, raising your team abilities well, and just like the UI and the pace of it, the complexity of the story, it's a lot more milder in the Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced version. But it has a charm all of its own. The artwork is beautiful. The color palette is delightful. These cinematics, which are done on this tiny, tiny GBA screen, really still gets to me. And if you like that world, this is set in the world of Ivalice, which is the setting of other Final Fantasy mainline games like Final Fantasy 12.
Oh, yes. Okay.
It's the same world. So you have the Banga, the dog people, and you have the cat bunny people. I forget their names, but also the other thing that they added to Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, which is an improvement over the first game, is the law system. So in each match of Final Fantasy Tactics, the original, if you fought it 100 different times, you could beat it the same way each time. But this time around, there is a referee that joins every single battle, even against bosses. And the referee will come in and say, you are not allowed to use this ability.
Oh.
So one time my kid was playing Final Fantasy Tactics Advance next to me. Funny enough, we were playing the same game. And they had a battle where they said, you cannot strike your opponents.
Huh.
So they all had all these soldiers, warriors, whatever, with swords and this and that, and all they could use was one character had black magic, and one character had monk abilities.
Oh, so this happens after you've already chosen your characters?
Yeah, this happens. This happens. Technically, you are allowed to swap out your party makeup before the actual turn-based combat starts, but the judge lays down a law and says you can't use this. This is a red card offense, and this is a yellow card offense.
Wow.
And you can actually just lose the battle if you fail to do it. So it's great because that keeps you on your toes. It mixes it up every time. So really brilliant. Anyways, that game is well worth checking out if you can find it.
Yeah,
Final Fantasy Tactics Advance for the GBA. Fantastic game.
I think there was a version of that on the Vita, which is partly why I was trying to dig mine out recently and wasn't able to find it. But I've been meaning to try it on the Android version.
Yep.
But I don't really like playing involved games on my phone. I want something that I can just play in short bursts. And any game you have to like spend 5 minutes loading up and then save and going in and out, or if it would crash if you switch screens. I'm just not really invested in that. So I'm hoping for like a Switch version or something.
Yeah, I had that exact same problem while I was the last time I played. The Android version is, I think I was waiting in line to get on a flight, and then I had to show my whatever papers or something like that, and I closed the screen, and then I loaded it up. I lost 20 minutes of progress. So
not very user friendly.
Yeah, like the Vita will obviously have the quick resume. It's a great ability. I think it's just War of the Lions, the remake of the original that's on Vita or PSP. That's Vita, by the way. And Final Fantasy Tactics Advance is just for the GBA. But anyways, talked enough about it. Great game. One for the ages.
Excellent. Well, shall we jump to the analog tabletop?
Sounds great. Why don't you start us off?
Sure. Yeah, so I've been started working through some of my acquisitions from PAX Unplugged. First one this last week was the new expansion for Dune Imperium. Another game that we covered as a featured episode, but this is the new expansion called Bloodlines. That I think it might not even be officially out yet. It was like there were advanced copies at PAX. So there was two there were two expansions for the original game. Then there was the new sort of 2.0 Uprising, and this is the first new expansion since then. So it is very confusing. Like there's literally like almost flow charts of like, well, this for this module, if you have the original version or the base version, you need to take these cards out. If you've got this expansion, you need to add these in, and it's very complicated with the different systems now. I think they could have done that a little cleaner. It does require a little bit of work. Interestingly, this is very similar to the original Rise of X expansion. So the first expansion for the original base game follows a very similar sort of overall structure in that half of it is they've added technology tiles, much like Rise of X. Those tiles you can buy, and basically each add a new ability. So it could be a passive ability, or it could be a once per round ability that you have. Basically, I mean, the abilities themselves are different, but that concept is exactly the same as Rise of X. Slightly different ways to what allows you to purchase them. I can't really say that much about them because in a three-player game, not one of us bought a single technology, and part of that I think is just that the new Uprising version of Dune Imperium is much more specialized. All of the cards you're purchasing are much more sort of one note and tying into very specific synergies. There's not as many sort of broad use cards, so you really encouraged to zero in on one or two strategies, whether it's the summoning worm strategy or the discarding a whole bunch of cards to get bonuses. So I can see this being interesting there. It's not essential in that sense though, because like it's so easy to ignore that part of the game because they're all very expensive. Like you have to spend a whole bunch of spice. Spices is so incredibly hard to come by. It's a very tight economy in this game. And every spice you get, every water you get, is this really tough decision of do I spend this to go to a guild space, or do I spend it to buy this card, or to buy technology? Really tough decisions in this game, which I think is one of its strengths. But it's adding to the sandbox of the options that you have, rather than you're not going to be able to engage in everything in any particular session of this game. So the other thing it adds is, much like Rise of X added, I think it was Dreadnoughts, this new combat unit. This also adds a new combat unit, the Sajikar, the sort of
The specialized warrior, like mercenaries, are they?
yeah. So you can hire those, but rather than just being able to buy them at any time from this pool, they're sort of seeded onto the board in specific locations. And so the first person to travel to each of those worker placement spots will get to claim one of those units. They don't like they actually have the same strength as a regular combat unit in the game. Thing is, when you take one, you also get a tile that will give you a special ability. Like when you use one of those in a battle, you might get an extra resource. You might get some spice or an additional some combat strength, only when that unit is in the combat. But if you have multiples of those Sajika units, then using one of them will trigger all of the tiles you get. So they're kind of cumulatively more effective the more you get, which is really, it's that tension because it is a race. There's only 6 of them scattered across the board, and it's a race for every single one of those. So it does create much more that interaction tension, trying to hoover them up as quickly as possible, and force you out of the sort of optimal locations at the start of the game. So again, not really an essential part. It does add some great dynamics, but it's again adding to the sandpit of options rather than forcing. It's something that everyone is going to be engaging in equally. But that's part of the charm of Dune Imperium is just incredibly tight economy. How are you going to spend this? What are you going to focus on? Especially with Uprising being more specialized synergies to focus on. Almost too prescribed in a sense. Sometimes, like it's very obvious that if you start getting some focusing on the worms, then that's all you're going to do is find ways to buy worms, right? So I am still really enjoying this. The other thing it adds obviously is new leaders. So there's like 8 new leaders, and most of those were really interesting as well. One adds their own sort of private worker placement zone. Mine had basically a sort of programmed system where I at the start of the game I was the spacing guild, I think. So I had to like program these cards under my board at the start of the game, and each time I hit a certain threshold in the guild, I was able to unlock one of those. But if I did a particular guild in the right order, I got even additional bonuses. So it was a fun little programming puzzle that was quite tough to navigate, but we just added a new way to engage with the game. So I think that was almost the most interesting part, was the new leaders. The others, sort of take it or leave it. You're not necessarily going to engage with it. Not really an essential part of the game, but fun to check out still.
Very nice. I think you should just continue, because I don't have any board games that I've been playing of late. So please tell us more.
I mean, I've been playing a lot of smaller games, so I will just quickly breeze over a couple of those. In that, I should have grabbed one, but I had a collection of mini games from Thundergriff, and they have a whole collection of soda pop games, basically in cans. I think you can only get them through their website, but I got the Kickstarter. It comes with 4 basically games, each in a pop can. So one of my neighbors regularly comes over for like 2-player game night, and I've decided that at least for now, for this part of the year, I want to mainline some of these older games, get them off the shelf with shame. These mini 2-player games. We got through like 3 of them in one night, and they're all very abstract 2-player games, sort of reminiscent of sort of checkers and noughts and crosses. One was like it's like Get Salty, I think it's called. It's basically there's 9 little snack shaped bits. You're basically playing noughts and crosses or tic tac toe, but like in 3 dimensions. It's like a version of 3-dimensional chess, but for tic tac toe. You probably the description of that will tell you if you're interested. It's pretty simple game. The charm of these is that you can just read the rules in 2 minutes and be playing very quickly. It's but they're with some room for mastery. I think so. It's a great, fun little game to take to the pub and try out. But it's not going to be an all timer for sure. But just a relatively simple abstract game to jump in and have some fun with. But the highlight of these games for me was one called Catacomb, in which you have these hex tiles. You're laying on some wooden cubes. They're not dice. They're just cubes of various colors, and you can, on your turn, you can move them around the board. You're trying to form stacks, and basically you pick them up like mandala style. Like you pick up a stack and then you drop
Mancala.
one cube. Yeah, in an adjacent. You drop one in an adjacent tile and then move it to the next tile. Drop another one, and so on. So manipulating stacks to try and create patterns on the board. It's sort of a game that I feel like has probably been done very similarly in other games that I just don't have the point of reference for. But for a short game that you can learn in 2 or 3 minutes and be playing like that doesn't take up very much space. I really enjoyed that. Got some fun room for mastery with very quickly to learn.
Very nice. Well, shall we talk about some RPGs then?
Yeah. Why don't you start us off?
Okay, sure. Well, I'll start with a new game that's not even out yet. So I suppose I could have called it news, but it's a crowdfunding. So I can't exactly say that because the crowdfunding program is over. But I still managed to back it as a late backer, and this project is called Starscape. It's by Golden Lasso Games, the makers of Decuma, which I'm not sure if you heard about, but it's really cool, a game/tool. So Decuma by Golden Lasso Games is a game you can play when you want to design a world for games you can play.
Interesting.
So people can play it together. I think it's tarot card based, and you can kind of design a setting for your RPG that you decide to play later. Anyways, the designer of that, her name is Kimi Hughes, is the designer of this new system, Starscape. And the cool thing about this is that it's sci-fi, powered by the apocalypse. So I know that there's been ones of those before, but unlike some of the other ones that you might have played in the past, Scum and Villainy, for instance, which is, I guess, Forged in the Dark, but still powered by the apocalypse based. This one is expressly influenced by some of the more hopeful found family style series, like your Star Treks across the board, Firefly, Farscape. They expressly reference characters and archetypes from those series. So basically, you're going to be playing in these kind of hopeful worlds and settings. And the designer, I've listened to some interviews with her, and basically the idea was that I guess she was never a fan of Star Trek, and then she got pregnant, and then found herself with a lot of time, sort of, gearing up for the pregnancy or whatever, or even postpartum, and just kind of binged watched all of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and then Voyager, and then Deep Space Nine. So these sort of things kind of just, I guess, get infused in her mind, and they had to have an outlet, and that outlet was Starscape. And Star Trek being one of my favorite series, and me being a fan of those more kind of hopeful worlds, those sort of found family scenarios, which extend to even other sci-fi type settings like Guardians of the Galaxy movies, or even games like Mass Effect. Like they have these unlikely crews thrust together by circumstance, and they have to achieve something great for to help people, or to achieve some large goal. So it's optimistic. It's just the sort of thing that I've been feeling I would like to try out. And even though there is the Star Trek Adventures system from Modifius, the 2D20 based, it's a little bit mechanical. It's not my favorite mechanical system. It has great production values. It has the license. So if you're just a Star Trek fan, you should wholeheartedly check that out in its second edition. But this one seems a little bit more looser, a little bit more narrative based, and gives you the flexibility to play in some other hopeful sci-fi worlds. So I have hope that the campaign is going to turn out well.
So you said this is more like a generative experience about like building out a world rather than playing in it?
No, that's actually the studio's previous game I was defining.
That?
Decuma,
Okay.
yeah.
Interesting.
So go check that out if you're interested in that. But you could also play them back to back. You can set up a world that you want to explore, set it up in Decuma, and then play it with Starscape.
I'm curious, so like Decuma, how granular is that? Is it like a zoomed out galaxy level, or is it zoomed in on planet surfaces and like?
I've actually listened to a couple of podcasts of actual plays about them. I think it's a little bit tighter. I think it's like more like, not exactly a galaxy. It's more like a kingdom, or a city. It's basically any sort of genre that you want to, but it's setting up a world, like maybe some light factions in that. I think you can set up characters as well, but you don't embody a character, I don't believe. I think you basically draw cards, and then you kind of interpret them tarot style as a group, and you're left at the end with an artifact, which is the sort of like the world building for a story or a game you might want to play.
Yeah, I've been looking at a few games like that, like even Delve that I'm still picking away at. It's like you're building out a dungeon to explore. That the implication being you could then use it as a dungeon to run a D&D party through or something.
Yeah, this game could let you do just that. So Decuma is, I think it's Decuma from Golden Lasso Games. So if either of those sound interest to you, go check them out. And I backed the Kickstarter of Starscape, so hopefully I'll get my copy soon enough.
Very cool. Excellent. Well, I've been looking through some of my recent solo zine acquisitions. As I just mentioned, still playing through Delve. It's quite a long-winded process. It's gradually getting harder and harder to keep track of all the moving parts and creatures and units in my dungeon. Still having fun with that. But a new one that I just picked up and tried is Exclusion Zone Botanist. So I think we may have spoken about this previously. And if you've listened to previous episodes, you probably know that I'm a big fan of zone fiction, like Pacific Drive. We played earlier last year. So this is basically you're going into the zone in which your no electronic devices work, and so the only way to catalog what you're seeing in there is to draw it. So you're basically it's looking at plants specifically, rolling dice to generate ideas for some of these plants that you're coming across, and the idea is to sketch them out. So you could journal it and describe some of the things you see or some of the experiences, but largely it's just about drawing the plants. So you're definitely having to work on like two levels creatively, both in thinking imaginatively about some of the weirder plants you might see and their structures and how they operate, but then you have to actually draw the thing as well. So definitely stretching out two creative muscles there, neither of which I am great at. I will say, in rolling the dice, the main focus that you're sort of identifying is just like the leaf shape. I'll put up a quick well, if you're watching a video, you can probably see here. But like you're rolling for the overall size of the plants and then the leaf shape. And there is also some defining characteristics, like this one has berries that are caustic. This one has mucus seeping from the plant, and there's some room for interpretation for how you might draw that. But it doesn't really like just thinking through any the varieties of ways in which a plant might be constructed, right? Whether it's a tree, or even a tree could like be so many like dozens of different shapes, or whether it's a shrub or a tall leafy plant, and it doesn't really guide you through some of those more interesting structures. You have to be willing to sort of think through that yourself. Like looking up reference photos helps me quite a bit. As someone who doesn't have a lot of background in like studying botany or biology, right? So it would definitely help if you have some background in that potentially, or in sketching, for example. But if you're willing to just sit there and think through the process of it, definitely some fascinating ideas. It's not really a like true role playing experience. Like the gamified elements, I feel a little bit arbitrary. Like you can go deeper into the zone, but all that means is you're more likely to find a plant that lets you engage with the game and draw something. Like whether you draw a new plant or not is the entirety of the stakes here. Always fun to see some more zone fiction. I would, like I said, I would like to see a little more fleshed out and some more of the more concepts personally, and sort of guiding you through some of the more some of the overall structures that a plant could take, or maybe some examples of some of botanical drawings. There is a new edition, like a second edition, coming out on Kickstarter soon, called Exclusion Zone Botanist Epsilon, I think is the name. You can hit like follow now on Kickstarter, and to get updates, I'll put the link in the show notes. But that is Exclusion Zone Botanist from Epsilon Press.
It's very cool how a lot of solo RPGs, much more than multiplayer RPGs, have you creating an artifact that you get to keep after you're done playing, or you get to create through the course of playing. You in fact seem to be quite a fan of that. You were playing that Haunted Hill House Hill
Yes.
Hill House, the
Portland
Delve
Hill House. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
The Delve game series where you create a map of a dungeon, and there was the Old Morris Cave where you were creating strata,
Yeah.
and now you're creating diagrams of biology.
Not to show my lack of drawing skills here, but there's some examples.
No, but in all those cases, and maybe like the real popular one, it's the 1,000-year-old vampire. You're typically journaling. It's really cool because as a single player game, you kind of have to evoke something, right? You have to get it out of you. You can always say, "Oh, I thought of something cool to do," but unless you get it written down, you don't have any proof that you expressed something.
Because
so
you could be sitting at the table, just staring at the wall, thinking through all these fantastical stories, but expressing yourself out in the world in various ways is really the joy of that. And whether you're sharing it with another person, talking through another person, or just by sitting by yourself, finding some way of proving that your experience existed and cataloging it.
Yeah, it's fascinating how much of kind of goes beyond a game into like a real soul-searching activity that you can't easily encapsulate. So it's really cool. Something that I don't know if I'm mentally, emotionally ready for yet, but I find it intellectually fascinating for sure.
Yeah, in so many ways, the actual gamified elements of these experiences are the least interesting parts. Like rolling the dice to see whether you survive or succumb, like, is not the interesting part. It's the not to say that it's the journey that matters, right? But it's those gamified elements are just there to help you engage with the systems and to promote you to think through these experiences.
Right, they're prompts to make you think or emote or feel. Yeah, very, very cool stuff that world offers.
Yeah, looking forward to exploring some more experiences there.
Nice. All right, I'm going to quickly wrap up a couple of topics. So, speaking of wrapping up, I finished my brief campaign of Cyberpunk Red that I was playing with my neighbors. It came to a really enjoyable close. I won't spoil the story how it went, but there was action, there was a climax, there was secrets, there was deals, there was closure to my character's personal story and other characters' stories. So I want to, really give a lot of kudos to my friend and neighbor Paul for running Cyberpunk Red for us. I was really happy with how it ended. Not a lot of the previous, D&D experiences I've had with this group, or the other settings that I've run for them. I feel like we haven't really evoked a lot of like character development, and I feel like this time we did, even in a short. I think it was just like 4, 5, 6 sessions. I guess 5 or 6 sessions. There was an arc, and our characters kind of grew. So it was great to see, and I really enjoyed that. And that's the style of game that I want to play more of. Which is interesting because you don't need a 20-year campaign to have your character grow, right? You can do it in as little as 4 or 5 sessions. I feel like you can't do it in 3 sessions. It's not enough to really grow because it's hardly enough screen time to even know where your characters are starting from. But once you are able to take it to 5, 6, 7, 8, all more sessions, all the better. Then you could really see your characters develop, see them have a culmination of their goals. So I like that. I really enjoy that experience.
Which is the flip side of what you were discussing with solo games there, right? I mean, it's the mechanics are just there to guide that. It's there to facilitate the story that gets you to the characters and how they express is sort of independent of the mechanics and the rules there, right? And they're just there to give you ideas and guide you along the way.
Yeah, and that's really the root of the great thing of traditional role-playing games, multiplayer role-playing games, is that you tell the story together. That's really not just about the GM being an adversary to the player characters, to the players. It's telling a story together, and the GM just really facilitates that and is a player along with the rest. So I guess the system is the facilitator in solos, but yeah, it has some parallels, but each has its unique balances. And obviously, traditional RPGs are fantastic if you can get a group of willing participants together.
Absolutely.
So I really enjoyed that. And next up, we're going to be trying a system called Dungeon Crawl Classics, which it's OSR, basically
Right.
part of the old school revival or renaissance. But nobody owns OSR, right? OSR is many things. It's basically trying to play games that are more like D&D 1, not D&D 3 or D&D 5, D&D OG. And in this case, it's called Dungeon Crawl Classics, the system we'll be playing. But it's I've had one experience with OSR style games, which I played a game called Old School Essentials at TCTC. And I really enjoyed it. You do this system called a funnel. Each player starts with multiple level 0 characters who are very, very simplistic, have few attributes, have few hit points, have little equipment or skills or training or ability or fortitude. And you just run them through a gauntlet of dangers. And if they, if they get punched too hard or stabbed by a goblin, they are dead. And it's about mortality. It's about threat. And if any of your characters manage to survive, they earn the right to graduate to level 1. So it's sort of like before a D&D campaign, the modern D&D even starts, you have this gauntlet called the funnel. So
Yeah, OSR games very much seem to be mechanics first, and fiction very much as an afterthought, second,
yeah,
third, kick down the road.
I would agree with that, and also emphasize that it's sort of like vibes first. You
Mm.
know, the mechanics are definitely there. The narrative is not strong. It's more like, let's get the feel of having a wacky adventure, kind of like what's those like American Ninja Warrior or something like that. Let's just see a
Like
dozen
Takeshi's Castle,
people.
or
Yeah, exactly. Let's see a dozen mismatched people, personas,
mm.
go up against this gauntlet and see who lands on their face, and see who succeeds.
Whether the game can draw some drama out of that or some emergent storytelling, I think like some of them aren't interested in that at all. Others
Yeah,
can, like Mothership, for example, can use that
sure.
to great thematic effect. But some of them are just there to just run the numbers.
Yeah, in my experience, I haven't seen any attempt to develop a strong narrative. It's more like scenarios,
Yeah.
encounters. Let's see what we see,
Mm.
which is cool in its own right. So
Which in
I'm
many ways
interested
it
in
feels
trying
more
it.
like a board game, to be
Sure.
honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or a tactics war game or something. Yeah, yeah.
There's something generative about it. There's something like a test about it. It's really like a sequence of interesting encounters, which
Mm.
I guess is at the core of most good RPGs. And what you do with it after that is up to you or the GM to develop together. So maybe we will take it far, or maybe we'll just do the funnel and see where
Yeah,
if
curious to see
and
how
end
it
it there.
enables those different playstyles.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to trying Dungeon Crawl Classics DCC for the first time with my regular group.
Very cool. Yeah, well, hopefully we can get some more involved RPG sessions going sometime in the new year. I've got a couple of games I'd love to check out more of, like Mothership, Cloud Empress that we've talked about. So looking forward to organizing that something soon.
Excellent. Yep. And I want to revisit the cipher system, which I
Mm,
think I want to give another kick at the can there and see how well I do after my brief attempt the first time around. There's lots of great cipher-based game systems out there, and I have a bunch of the books, so I'm looking forward to trying that out again.
very cool.
Great. Anything
Okay.
else we should cover?
No, should we close the book?
Let's do it there. One
Okay.
last thing we need to do is we need to tell the folks listening what game we're covering next.
Hmm.
What game would that be, Daniel?
That is Pentiment, the medieval RPG from Obsidian Games that came out a couple of years ago. We'll be discussing that in our next featured episode.
That's right. It's out there on Xbox Game Pass. Go play it if you have access to that. Otherwise, spoiler alert, there's interesting gameplay in there, so you might enjoy playing along with us if possible.
If you are playing along and want to discuss that or any other game, you can contact us at omnigamersclub@gmail.com or at our website, omnigamers.club.
That's right. And check us out on YouTube. We post videos every time the audio podcast goes out. Leave a comment, like, and subscribe to that. Check us out on podcatcher of your choice if you haven't there. If you're coming from the other direction, we'd love to hear from you. And do please tell a friend if they might be interested in any of these topics we've been covering.
You can also find us on Blue Sky, which does feel very much like the last refuge of social media right now, as the borders come down on just about every other platform out there. But yeah, you can find me at Blue Sky at Board Game Feast.
And you can find me at OmniGamerMark on Blue Sky.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, Mark, and thank you everyone for listening.
Absolutely. And until next time, thank you, Daniel. Until next time, to the listeners out there, have a balanced diet of gaming.
Bye.
Bye bye.